on this computer. It's not saying anything to me. Normally it says record. All right, looks like it's going, but normally it says recording in progress.
Yeah, it's recording.
They said it to us.
Yes, it said.
Okay, good. So let me keep my train of thought. Let's just go over the schedule that I have on this slide right here. So I'm going to make a comment about the comment section in a moment. We're going to talk about what is world liter, what is great literature. We're going to talk about the readings on reading. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms if I can, just to everyone who had the same reading to talk about it for about 5 minutes, just really quickly, since you did it for last week, to try to reboot the memory. And then we'll go through them one by one and we'll put them up on the screen, right? So you will, you'll see them and we'll read them, little pieces of them out loud. Then we'll finish the class, with a discussion of mending wall and girl. And next week we'll get on with the personal introductions. So next week, the next assignment is Genesis part 1. So we're going to focus on chapter 1 of Genesis, but I'm asking you to read more than just chapter 1 because, well, a chapter in the Bible is a very brief section. It's like the equivalent of like a couple paragraphs. It's very short. So I want you to get kind of an extended portion of the Genesis story, chapters 1 through 11, because there's a lot of motifs and structure involved there that that extend through all those stories. But we're going to focus on so the Old Testament here, Genesis, which is the first book of the Old Testament. Genesis means beginning or birth or creation. So the Bible begins at the beginning, and not just the beginning of something, it's the beginning of everything. So it's quite exciting. And what's interesting about narratives is they don't have to begin at the beginning. Some narratives begin in the middle. Some narratives even begin at the end, strangely enough. Okay, so let me turn to Blackboard for just a moment, if I can. Where is, one moment here. I've got so much stuff on my desktop. Here we go. Let me try again. And here. Okay, everybody see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, just let me know. Oh, the comments section. If I didn't say it last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it's really important as we go forward in any class, like when we meet and have a Zoom class, to feel free to put comments in the comments section to respond, either in terms of questions or in terms of comments. I don't really care which. Sometimes I'm going to say, I'd really like you to speak and I don't want to see comments. And sometimes I'm going to say, I have a few things to say for the moment and I'd prefer you to do the comments. But comments are a great way for me to kind of judge the temperature of the room with all you guys, the room metaphorically speaking, to kind of see where you're at, to see what's going through your minds. If you have a question, someone else probably has the same question. If you have a comment, we'd like to know what it is. Never assume that what you have to say is the same as another person, because we're all different. We're all responding to these readings and their ideas, their themes, topics in your own particular way. And our goal in class, as much as is possible, is to have dialogue and discussion about these readings and not for me to lecture. Got a few things I want to say today, and then I want to stand aside and have the class do a lot of discussion. Okay, so here's the quiz right here. It's all really pretty straightforward. It's a multiple choice quiz. There will be another quiz like in a few weeks. I'll let you know about it soon. Again, it's a kind of like, this is not the most challenging quiz, right? So should be kind of like an easy grade for you. You have 60 minutes to complete it once you start it. It's not going to take 60 minutes, but just remember, once you start it, you do need to complete it. It's set up on Blackboard such that once you start, you must complete. You're able to like navigate back and forth to the questions if you want to like go back and check your answers. It's not like you get locked out of the question once you answer it or anything like that. Some people have got in touch with me about exemptions needing more time. And if you are in that boat of having like an accommodation letter dealing with quizzes and exams needing more time, and you haven't already let me know, please just let me know and I can build in a little exemption into the quiz. It's very easy now that I've actually figured out how to do it after a handful of years on Zoom. Okay, so the due date is February 20 by 11:59. That's the deadline. If you don't get it done by then, you will still be able to log into the quiz and take it, but it's going to be late and it's going to be marked late. So you're going to get a grade reduction for that. I'll still let you take it. The other thing is I'm not allowing anyone to see any answers. Like what you can do is get a grade once you take it, but then also you can see what you got right or wrong. And I don't want to put up issues of what you specifically got right or wrong until everybody has taken the quiz. So I don't have any games about that. Right. Haven't had any games in the past, but some other things have happened where students have done some funny things they shouldn't have been doing. So that's that. One other thing, it's a kind of minor thing, but just to think in these terms going forward and keep this in mind, I've kind of changed the time frame for the dates of the week. So what you see here, so this is for next week, the Bible and Genesis. I'm having our quote unquote school week start on the 16th, which is today's the 15th. So on today, we cover the material that you were expected to cover for today, the homework assignment, right? Girl and Mending Wall. So how I'd like to think of it is the very next day is the beginning of the next week where you've got the next kind of bundle of materials to do, whether it's to watch a video, to read, so on and so forth, and to complete a reading response. So then the end of the week is actually the day we meet and we're going to discuss the assignment you've been given, right? So you're going to read Genesis. The due date is the 22nd. The 22nd is our next class. So that's when we're going to talk about it all. And I've got it structured that way for the remainder of the semester, or I will have it structured that way. These ones don't appear to you right now because there's no point in making it confusing by putting more stuff up there. There still are a handful of people who need to email me at my Gmail account. That Gmail account is on the syllabus. That Gmail account is written about 100 times in the announcements. If you haven't emailed me yet and gotten a response from my Gmail account, please do that. I don't care, do it now if you haven't already done it. I have almost everyone in the class, but not quite. So does anyone have any business questions about anything I've just talked about? Anything confusing? Any concerns?
Yeah, when is the where's the homework, or is it just a quiz?
Okay, so each week your homework is going to consist of a reading and what I call a reading response. And a reading response is just questions about the reading. All the reading responses can be found here in the discussion board. And so if you click, let's just go to the Bible here. If you click here, I give you some important reminders. Then I give you a little description of the substance we're covering that week. And it's really important to read because it orients you in terms of the things I am interested in. It orients you in terms of focal points for the week and so on. And then I've got the materials you need, which are all down below, and then the assignment itself, right? So you get the reading response questions by either going to these links here, or you can just go directly to the discussion board by clicking over here on the left-hand menu, right? So I've got all the materials here. You're expected to watch the videos and comment on them. The readings, sometimes I'll have them in a separate folder, and sometimes I will just have them like loose, so to speak, posted here, right? So you click here. One big thing for next week is that there are actually 3 readings. Our focus is on Genesis, but I'd also like you to, this is a long introduction here from the Oxford edition of the Bible. I'd like you to kind of skim it. You don't have to read it super close. However, this is one of the readings this semester where I'm giving you secondary literature, right? The Bible is the primary source, and the intro and this chapter by Leon Cass from his book, The Beginning of Wisdom, is secondary literature that is interpretive in nature. And so we're going to spend some time really drilling down into Genesis to try to draw out not only some fundamental meanings, but kind of as much meaning as possible. So you can start to see how much is really lurking in a rather short text. All of you read Joseph Brodsky's How to Read a Book, right? Maybe I should ask it now. Can anyone answer the question? Can anyone answer Joseph Brodsky's question about how to read a book? What is his answer?
He just sort of says to read poetry. That's
Yeah.
sort of his biggest answer.
So we're stealing a little bit of fire from our discussion of that article, but that's okay. Joseph Brodsky's 1-sentence answer of how to read a book is to read poetry. And by poetry, the word poetry can have a lot of different meanings, actually. But he's using the meaning that we're all familiar with, which is to say a shortened, condensed bit of writing that's normally very figurative, metaphorical, symbolic, that uses a very economic number of words to say as much as possible, right? Why? Now for 500, right? This is like a game show. For 500, why does Joseph Brodsky tell us to read poetry if we're going to learn how to read a book? What's the deal there? What's the dealio, as we say? How the heck is reading poetry going to help us to read a book? And you realize very quickly when he says read a book, he's not just talking about like basic literacy of being able to read versus not read at all, right? He's talking about really interpreting it and understanding how to extract the meaning from it.
He
What?
says, sorry.
Go for it, Renee.
He says it's like a little bit more direct than prose. I think that's the name.
Yeah, that's part of it. What else?
I'm sorry. Let me go to my notes.
Renee or anybody else?
Repeat that.
Pardon?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
So Renee or anybody else, answer the question of why read poetry in order to learn how to read a book. So Renee says poetry is more direct. I want to make a little caveat there. Poetry is not necessarily more direct, but it uses a lot less words to say a lot more. Because sometimes, I mean, if poetry uses things like metaphors and symbolism, like that's actually a kind of indirect way of writing that in some ways makes it less clear what's being said.
I think he says to read poetry because it's complex. There's multiple interpretations to what the narrator or the author is saying.
Okay, good. Yeah, let's stop right there. Poetry is condensed, meaning it uses an economical number of words. It uses a few number of words compared. A poem can be 1 page. A novel is like 300 bloody pages. He's kind of arguing that the poet in 1 page can say what the novelist takes 300 bloody pages to say, right? We always think kind of like a naive point of view that the person who writes more is the better writer. In fact, when you really work on an essay or say an article or something like that, you realize it's not hard to write a lot. It's actually hard to write a little and say a lot with a little. And he seems to argue that the poet is able to say the most with the fewest number of words. Yeah, Renee, I think I felt like you understood, it's just I'm being very picky about the word here, because the interesting thing is, yeah, so good. So you said, what did you, Ariba, you said something about like there are many interpretations.
Yeah, because the word choice or the diction is so specific, certain words mean different things to people, and thus there are
Okay.
different interpretations.
Okay, you introduced something really important here. You talk about diction and word choice. And diction just has to do with the words you choose to express yourself. And you're saying that in poetry, at least it's more common in poetry for a phrase or a word to actually have multiple meanings or multiple layers of meaning. And your argument is that those multiple meanings are the result of the way we all individually interpret it. Am I in the general ballpark?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just say everything you said is spot on and very well articulated. And I just want to, I'm going to make one little critique, and it would be a critique of the whole class, because I know you're all going to be guilty of it, because I know how us modern people think. Multiple meanings of a phrase or layers of meaning in a poem is not necessarily the result of the subjective interpretation of the reader from their own distinct, diverse point of view. Good poets, good writers can build in multiple layers of meaning and give you clues in the text to let you realize that there are those multiple layers. And it's not something that's subjective. It's actually something that's objective. It's something that's actually intended by the author, because, I mean, what is a good author? It's kind of two things. They have control over their words, how they arrange them, and their choice of words. And they also, because they have control over the words they use, they have control, or as good as control a human being can have, over the meaning, right? Now, there's no doubt that each of us is going to bring a certain facet of experience or a certain perspective to bear on a text. There is no getting around that. And there is that is a vital part of reading. But I think we have like an overactive idea that like modern art, books, poetry are just what we make of them, right? From our point of view. And there are some works of art and some artists, some writers who really capitalize on that kind of open-endedness. But I would say most art through history is really intended, whether you're talking about literature or the visual arts or film, most of it really intends to have specific meanings at a certain basic fundamental level that you can't really argue with. I mean, one thing about a text is that it says this rather than that, right? Even when you try to make it mean something slightly different than what someone else thinks it means, you're still discussing or arguing over the same text with the same words, with the same diction, with the same grammatical structure. And you're always bound by that structure, right? It's like a law. A law means one thing. It doesn't mean many things, right? When you enter the legal process and it says it is a crime to do X, well, if you haven't done X, well, you haven't it's not the crime. And if you have done X, it's the crime. It's actually quite black and white. I mean, obviously, that's the challenge of the legal system, to clarify that. And of course, the problem comes on like the realm of evidence and things like that. But great works of literature really intend to have layers of meaning that the author is trying to communicate to you that you have to kind of excavate or dig out on your own. They don't just kind of yield themselves up. Okay, so let's come back really quickly to the Bible here. Genesis and the Bible can be and really should be considered a work of poetry. The way it's written, the condensed diction, the amount of meaning that's really compressed into a small amount of space. And so what we're going to do with Genesis is kind of take this idea of Brodsky, and if a poem has the same amount of meaning as a 300-page novel, we're going to try to extract all that meaning from the Genesis story, and we're actually going to spend a good bit of time on it. And it's the only reading during the semester that we're going to kind of get so in the weeds of all the issues. But it's like every single verse of Genesis is just laden with so many implications. I think last class we talked about just in the beginning, which is the opening phrase of the Bible. I mean, even that expression in the beginning is kind of laden with so many implications. You could say kind of philosophical and even metaphysical. It's a big fancy word that I don't like using, but everything in the Bible has so many layers of meaning. And we're going to really kind of see Brodsky's idea on display in practice when we look at Genesis. And the secondary literature is going to kind of help us, peel up the layers of meaning that are kind of lurking there. And the more and more you look, the more and more you will see them, and you'll realize they're not just arbitrary. They're not just subjective. They're really lurking there. Okay. Any other business stuff about the layout on Blackboard or expectations in the course or anything like that? This is our third week, but it's only the second time we've met. So now's a good time to kind of like get any of these issues out there if they're still lurking. Okay. So, in terms of the books, I haven't said anything about getting the books other than you need to get them. I will come out with a date sometime this week, and it will be like still in the future. You're going to have plenty of time to get your books. The first one, Othello, is going to be the last thing we're going to read for the semester. We're going to finish with Othello, and Homer's Odyssey, we're not going to need for a little bit. So you've got plenty of time to get the books, but I am going to give you a date like in a few weeks to say, please have the books and show them to me on this date. And I'll mark you down credit, mark you as for having them, and you'll get credit for that. Any other questions? Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We have 5 readings. I'm going to switch right here. And there are readings right there. And I'm going to try to create 5 breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do in the breakout rooms is very simple. You've got 5 minutes to go over these 3 questions: the main point, how they understand the primary function of reading, and what you thought was most important. So let me think. So I'll put it on let participants choose room. So that way you can just go into the room connected with the right reading. And I'll leave this. Will the screen share stay up once you go into the breakout room? Do you know?
I don't think it does.
Okay, but these questions are, they're pretty simple. So everybody can, or someone, we can type them into the comment section if we really need to. Okay, so number 5 and create. So room 1 is why read? question mark. Room 2 is weapons for readers. Room 3 is how to read a book. Four is, I'm just going to letter to Vittori. And okay. And let me see. So open all rooms. Are you guys able to go into them yourselves, or how does it work?
I think you have to click on it and then you go.
Okay. All right, so everybody's got 5 minutes. How are there so many letters of Tory? H through L. I can see that's a problem. R through X. And submission 0. Okay, that's fine. Unassigned. Come on, people. One, two, three, 4, and 5. Question for those who are still here. So you don't have any little window that says anything about breakout rooms?
No, I'm trying to like figure out what to click.
Okay, so first of all, most of the class has managed to find their way into the right room. So do you have like a, what do you call it? Like the menu bar of Zoom? Maybe you just need to go in there and click on the breakout room. One second. I don't even know how to do this. Okay. And Vicky, are you there? Okay. So you're the one student, because you've got Y for your last name, who has submission. Correct? That's the one you wrote about? Okay. Um, you want to go over the questions with me, or you want to just do it with the class when we get there?
I can just go over with it with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, you want to shoot?
I have to pull up my response. So for the first question, I said the main point would be how I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that name.
The author?
Yeah, the author's name.
Yes, it's just pronounced Welbeck.
The main point that Holbeck was trying to make is how literature isn't like how it used to be anymore.
Good. And can you specify in what way he thinks it's different?
So what I wrote was that our generation have been distracted by the infatuation of our desires to make ourselves an important part of society, and our desires for money. We are slowly losing the deeper meaning on literature. The desire for money has overpowered the desire to deeply understand.
Okay, great.
literature.
Okay, great. So the narrator of the tale is a professor, and he's looking at his students, and you guys in some way are kind of in that position too. So yes, he makes this criticism. Everybody's trying to get up in the world. There's a kind of simplistic notion of success, and that's contrary to studies in the university generally, from his point of view anyway. And it's contrary to what can be found in literature, or the kind of sustenance that can be found there. So I think that aspect you nailed it on the head. So then the question is, what does he think literature is all about? What does he think makes it so darn meaningful? And more important than things like money and success?
He thinks that literature brings out another form of connection with another being through their soul. And it's like from one person writing to another. And we sometimes tend to lose that connection.
Okay. And so when you say the connection that literature facilitates or consists of a relationship between one person and the other, who are the people he's talking about?
People
Make
from
that
the
connection.
past, like authors from the past, or any written book.
Yeah. I think you get it completely. I just want you to say it in the most direct and simple way possible, so you can really see what he's saying. Who has the relationship? Let's just say this is a valuable, substantive human connection that he sees as lacking out in the modern world or something. Who
The
is
author
having
and the
that?
reader.
Who is having yes? What's the basic premise here? That the author and the reader are engaging in a relationship by first the author being willing to formulate their thoughts on black and white paper, to be preserved, indefinitely into the future. And then the act of reading is not just an academic exercise. The act of reading is not just digesting words. The act of reading is actually a process of engaging in a relationship with another human being, even though they're only there, their presence, right? Only exists in the form of words rather than flesh and blood, right? And in some ways, he even kind of argues that, like, it's that relationship with the words, with the speech of the human being, that's even kind of more the essence of the I mean, you could say that those words are more the essence of the human being than like their physical body or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So we may get you at the very end of class. I think we gotta, we'll see if we can cover all this. Oh, all right. Yeah. We go till 9:25, right? 9:25. Okay. How do I end all these breakout rooms?
I think you did. Yeah.
Okay, let me just click this thing off and make it all go away. All righty. So we're all back in the main room. Okay, good. It looks like it. Wow, that was a virtual experience. Can I ask the $1 million question? How did you guys manage to navigate to the breakout room? Because from my end, it was not actually clear.
It prompts us, it tells us, would you like to join the breakout room? And
Okay,
then
good.
it breaks it down to the subcategories.
Awesome. Now I know the mysteries of Zoom. All right, cool. So, oh, let me just change the share here so we can get the readings up. And no, I want this. There we go. Okay. Everybody see that now? We've got our friend Harold Bloom.
Yes.
All right, good. So you've had a chance to chat. Who would like to start with these three questions? Starting with, what is the main point here? What's the main point of Harold Bloom's little essay, Why Read? Oh, no. I need voices now. Okay, now no more comments. I need somebody speaking. What's the point? Why read? Simple question. The answer to this question is the main point, right? All right, Kevin says self-discovery. Can I do who else do I have who wrote on why read? I'd like to hear your voices.
That was me, Anastasia.
And Anastasia, what's your answer?
I think one of the main points is why to read is to discover ourselves, but also not to take for granted whatever is written, but to wait and consider.
Okay,
And
very good. Yeah, so that's a line right from him.
I would say is to create our own opinion and perspective to any readings.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. And this is something that's going to come up in Tim Park's Weapons for Readers. There's some type of reading consists of some type of kind of primal interaction between the reader and the writer, the point of view of the reader and the point of view of the writer. Now, I think that's really a kind of strange thing to say, that reading someone else's words, someone else's speech, allows you to arrive at your own act of self-discovery or allows you to discover things about yourself. And Tim Parks is going to say some of the same things here in a slightly different way. How is it on God's green earth that I read someone else's ideas, someone else's thoughts, someone else's words, someone else's diction, and yet I arrive at acts of self-discovery through reading other people's words? How does that work? How does that even make sense? How is that not just paradoxical?
Because you can like, oh my God, what's the word for it? You can identify yourself in those words, even though you're not the one who wrote them. You read them and you're like, oh, look, that's me. Or
Okay, good. So you can identify with those words, and you can also do what? Decide, identify with them.
To agree or disagree?
Yes, you may find that you identify with them, or you could say agree, or you could also discover that you don't identify with them, right? So it's interesting. If you want to learn, this is something that you see in Tim Parks and Harold Bloom. If you want to learn about yourself, you have to get out of your own head. You have to get out of your own little world. You have to get out of your own sphere and expose yourself to the rest of the world. Or in this case, expose yourself to another human being's point of view as manifest in a text, right? When we get to submission, if we have time, we should have time, we'll see that, I mean, the author of Submission, his name is pronounced Houellebecq. I know it's a very funny looking French name. Even in French, it's pretty funny, unusual spelling. But I mean, he talks about reading being kind of the meeting of two human beings, right? And one thing you discover is if you want to understand who you are, and I think I'm kind of just paraphrasing what Bloom and Tim Parks are saying. If you want to discover what's inside of you, you actually have to get out of yourself and know what the heck is going on in the world. Because it's only that ability to have a point of comparison between yourself and the world that you can start to see how you're both either similar or different from other people in the world, right? You have to know something about the world. So then how does he say you should go about reading? Because he doesn't just talk about why read, he talks about how to read. And actually Anastasia started to hint at a little bit. How does Harold Bloom think you should go about reading a book? Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. What about any interesting things that came to your attention in reading this that struck you, that you found noteworthy or strange or worthy of making note of? Oh, we've got a very quiet class. Okay. So what I'd like to do is to read these two highlighted passages. Could I have a volunteer read for us?
Sure.
All right, Brian, go for it.
For the first one, right? It matters.
Yes, it matters.
It matters if individuals are retained to any capacity to form their own judgments and opinions, that they continue to read for themselves, how they read well or badly, and what they read cannot depend wholly upon themselves, but why they read must be for and in their own interest. You can read merrily to pass the time, or you can read with over urgency, but eventually you will read against the clock. Bible readers, those who research the Bible for themselves, perhaps exemplify the urgency more plainly than readers of Shakespeare. Yet the quest is the same. One of the uses of readings is to prepare ourselves for change, and the final change is change allies in universal.
Alas, the
Alas,
final change, alas, is universal. We'll come back to what the final change is that is universal. Let's take it from the top here for a second. We're not going to talk about every last thing he says here, but we need to kind of hit the highlights on the tour. It matters if individuals are to retain any capacity to form their own judgments and opinions, that they continue to read, and not just read it in any way, but read for themselves. So that for themselves is what we've all talked about. Something about reading as an act of self-discovery. And what does Harold Bloom want us to read? He wants us to read things that appeal to us, right? Here we are in a literature class where we're supposed to read great works of literature. Well, not everybody's motivated by great works of literature and long novels or plays by Shakespeare. He would prefer you read the great works of literature, but if you won't do that, he'll settle for a second best. Read anything that seems relevant to you. If individuals are to retain any capacity, I'm going to make an argument here that when he uses the word individual, he doesn't just mean like the distinct, separated human being from all other human beings. He means someone more like someone who actually knows themselves and understands how they are distinct from other people and lives as a distinct individual, right? In one sense, we're all born as individuals because we're all different and we're all like physically distinct. We're not connected, literally, despite the fact that we're like part of communities and families and things like that, and schools. On the other hand, a true individual is someone who does something in their life, achieves something to actually make them stand out from everybody else, to make them stand out from the crowd, to make them stand out from the herd. He says if individuals are to retain any capacity to form their own judgments and opinions, that they continue to read for themselves, or that they must continue to read for themselves. So what is he arguing here? That one of the primary functions of reading is to develop our ability to make judgments and to form our own opinions. And I don't just mean any opinion, I mean our own distinct opinions. Are the opinions of most people particularly individualized? Are most people's opinions that unique?
No.
Do most people think for themselves?
No.
Let's just say no. Everybody here in our class is different. Everybody thinks for themselves. But let's just say most of humanity, we conform. There's a powerful impulse and a powerful incentive to following the herd, to believing what everybody else believes, and by definition, not thinking for yourself, right? Just 1 second, Angelica, right? And when he says the ability to form our own judgments, he's talking about using reading to find out who we are as a human individual by actually forcing us, reading forces us to think for ourselves, right? Rather than doing what we do most of the time. And we're all guilty of this, which is we follow what we're told. We do what we're told. The news says this, the opinion makers say that, the stars in Hollywood say this, and we go, like sheeple, right? And what is he arguing here? That great works or even just decent writing provides a sustenance for us to make judgments, right? This is going to be actually really crucial when we look at the Bible. And he talks about people who read the Bible. And, what is our goal in life? It's all the same for all of us. We all want to be happy, but we all don't let me cuss. We all don't really know what the fuck that is. We've been told by society a certain conception, and not all of what society says is bad, certainly not. But the problem is it's not specific to us as a human individual, right? And we're trying to kind of grope in the dark about what is actually going to make us genuinely fulfilled or happy, rather than just kind of like satisfied or contented in the moment. And the answer is we don't always have, we don't really, it's one thing, it's tough enough to pursue happiness, but part of the problem of pursuing happiness is you don't actually know what you're looking for. You're not really sure, right? And that reading things that seem relevant to you allow you to cultivate your own opinions about who you are and what you really want, right? Very simple. You read something and you identify with it. You say, oh, that's like me. Or you read it and say, boy, that person has that author, character, whatever it is, they have a very different conception of what life is about. And I don't relate to it at all. Well, guess what? You've learned something about yourself. We always kind of assume that like everybody's like us. And the more you get exposed to the world, the more you realize like they're all different kinds of people and they're different in all different kinds of ways. And you can't even have imagined that they could have been different in that way, right? Like I was reading a story in another class, or we were reading a story, and I asked, what was the setting like? What was the neighborhood like? And the student replied, it was a normal neighborhood, a normal neighborhood. Well, it was normal for her, but it wasn't normal for another student who had had a different type of experience, right? And just kind of assume like, well, that's the way everybody grows up, and it's not. Angelica, what do you want to say?
Oh no, I was just like adding to what you said, but Renee said something similar to what I was thinking, that since we're like younger, we're kind of told what to think by our parents or how to act.
Yeah.
And it's not until we get older that we might be able to form our own opinion.
That's very well put. So the great challenge of life is to function in the world, you have to internalize all those rules. Freud called it like the superego. The parents, when you're 2 or 3 years old and you're starting to become verbal, they say, do this, don't do that, don't climb up here, don't stick your finger in the electric socket, don't do this, don't. And, then you get to a certain age where you're a teenager and a young adult where you know what the rules of society are, and you know how not to get in trouble and how not to make a mess with your life. But obviously that's not enough to be satisfied, to just avoid negative consequences. You need to start figuring out who you are. And obviously, on one hand, you're an extension of your parents, and on another hand, you're not. And you don't even know what way that is exactly until you figure it out. Yeah, so obviously this has interesting resonances with girl, where you've got the girl being in kind of, let's just say, indoctrinated with all these rules and regulations and in her society that are very specific to her society. And then you get a sense that this girl is not cut out for this world, that there's some other calling she has. Okay. He says, what you read cannot depend on themselves. It has to be in your own interest. You can read merely to pass time. That's okay. That's kind of like, and that's what we call entertainment, right? But I think he's concerned with reading with a purpose, like you're trying to figure out what you want in life, who you are. It's something more serious than just entertainment. Not to say that it isn't entertaining or enjoyable. He says we all read against the clock. What does he mean by that? That we read against the clock?
Most of them.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you can go, ladies first.
I think that he meant that most of us read like for a reason. Like, for example, even us reading now, most of us are rushing to read most of these articles or essays because we have other things to do. So most people have things to do other than to read. So we are in a rush to read.
Yeah, you pretty much. Yeah, you're just about there. Let's just be clear. We only have so much time. we have lives, we have practical things to do. I mean, this is the great thing. I mean, his vision of reading is actually very practical. It's the most practical thing we could do. We need to understand ourselves and figure out what's going to make us happy, right? So we have an idea of what to do when we walk out the door. Unfortunately, there are many other even more basic practical realities that we face every day, like paying the bills, paying the landlord, working to make the money to pay the landlord. And we don't always have the luxury of self-exploration, right? I mean, even a university education by the standards of history is a great luxury where you have time. And I'm sure you guys don't feel like you have time because many of you probably have jobs and all kinds of other stuff, maybe even families to take care of. But the opportunity to be a young adult and to have time to take classes and things like that is really, in the course of human history, it's a great luxury. So, and here's the problem: you read against the clock. Reading takes a lot of time, right? It's very time consuming. We live in a world that's not geared toward reading. It's geared toward all the computer media, flashing lights, telephones with push buttons, and it's very sexy and appealing. And reading has a certain antiquated aspect, old-fashioned aspect, because it's time consuming. And he understands that people in the modern world don't have all the time in the world, right? So we read against the clock, and that's going to be relevant at the end of this paragraph. He says, Bible readers, those who search the Bible for themselves, perhaps exemplify the urgency more plainly than readers of Shakespeare. Yet the quest is the same. Well, he doesn't quite spell it out, but what is the quest in reading the Bible? What is the reader seeking in that book? Notice he doesn't really talk about religion or anything like that. He doesn't talk about God. He just talks about people who read the Bible passionately.
They're looking for an answer to something.
Yeah, they're looking for the maybe the meaning. To say the meaning of life, that's so cliched, but we're looking for answers to problems in our lives, right? One of the goals of the Hebrew Bible, the first 5 books are called the Torah. And the Torah has many translations. It can mean like the law. It can also mean the guide. The guide. What is the Torah? It's a guide to life. Why is it a guide to life? Because human beings live a life that has alternatives. We're different from other animals. We can frame and make choices. We can say, I want to do this and I don't do that. I don't want to do that. We experience dilemmas. Should I do this or should I do that? And because human life is the way it is, we need guidance in a way that other animals don't need. They just live by impulse, instinct, chemical fluctuations in their bodies. And we have questions that we need to answer, and the answers aren't clear. So he's talking about people turning to the Bible in search of the answers of how they should live their lives, right? It's a slightly different conception of thinking about the Bible than, thinking about it in terms of simply in terms of institutional religion, and I've got to know the stories, and this is true, and this represents faith in God. He's talking about a slightly more kind of humanistic approach to the Bible. Okay. He says, reading prepares us for change, and the final change, alas, is universal. First of all, what kind of changes might he be talking about? Apart from the universal final change.
Is he talking about like death?
Okay, so the final change is death, right? So that's like the ultimate of reading against the clock. We're reading against the clock in terms of we're all going to die someday. Our time is finite, and we want to use it in the best way we can. I think this is one argument for why he says you want to read substantial things rather than any old shit, right? Because one day you're going to be dead. So why would you ever waste your time with a bunch of crap, right? Read the good stuff. Feed your mind and soul with the good stuff rather than the crap. What other kind of changes might he be talking about beside death? What happens as we go through life as human beings? What kind of changes do we experience?
We get older, we gain wisdom, I guess.
Maybe. Okay, so yeah, that's a very important word. What are those people looking for in the Bible? They're looking for wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is a kind of a knowledge that is it's practical knowledge to be applied, right? It's not just knowledge like, oh, I know something. It's knowledge that I can take and then apply it to my life so I can be happy, right? And ideally, when we get older, we get wiser, but that's not been proven by Dr. Fauci yet. Not everybody gets wiser when they get older. But we're searching for wisdom. Let's put it that way, or at least the people who take the initiative. So we go through different phases in our life, right? Where we experience different things. We have a childhood that has one set of problems. We have a young adulthood that has another set of problems. We have a middle-age period. I don't know. Most people, or a lot of them, will settle into a family and have kids. Then they've done that, and then they're in another stage of their life. So I think kind of what he's saying is that, each stage of your life really has some different characteristics to it. It presents different challenges, different problems. And until you get to that stage, you really don't realize what they are. Like the problems of a teenager who's trying to get attention from their peers is very different from a mother and father trying to raise a teenager or something like that. It's just a whole different perspective. And you have a different sets of needs during these different periods. Okay. Who is reading? Brian, you want to read the next paragraph for us?
Sure.
Go for it.
Like every other activity of the mind, it must satisfy Johnson's prime concern, which
Oh,
is
no,
with
I'm sorry. Read from the beginning of the paragraph.
the way we read now. Okay.
Yes.
The way we read now, when we are alone with ourselves, retains considerable continuity with the past. However, it is performed in the academies.
Okay, let's stop right now. When he's talking about the academies, he's talking about what? It's nothing fancy.
School?
Yes. Where do we come into contact with reading? Where do we get, great books put in front of us? The Odyssey, Shakespeare, blah, 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 blah. Samuel Johnson. We get it. We get it in school. Now, there's a big issue here, and it's a problem that I always think about as a professor. And it's why I try to frame these books in the way I do. The Bible, Shakespeare, Dante, Homer, so on and so forth, Goethe, Flaubert, just to name a few, seminal writers. None of the books that they've written, or the Bible, none of these books were intended to be read in school and analyzed by professors. These books were written by authors or priests, like the Bible, intended for people out in the world. They're about real life, and they're for people who are living in the real world and not in the ivory tower of the academy or the university or the school. And yet, most of us are going to encounter these books primarily in school. And it's very easy to kind of misconceive that these are just like artifacts that belong to be studied in a very narrow way by professors in university. In fact, these books are not for that purpose at all. They're for real life, right? The Bible, it really speaks for itself in that way. So it's important to keep in mind that while we discover these books in this context, that they're not intended to be treated in an academic way, and their destination of these books is not the university, right? And all the negative things that come with the university, like silly theories, trying to explain away these books in silly terms that take away some of their bigger meanings, their bigger life meanings. Okay, Brian, you want to keep going?
So my dear reader and life hero is Dr. Samuel Johnson, who knew and expressed both the power and the limitation of incessant reading.
Incessant reading. That means like constant reading. So Samuel Johnson was a famous literary critic from the 18th century, and he is one of the great literary critics who wrote about Shakespeare and really elevated the status of Shakespeare at a time when he was kind of not considered the great dramatist that we know him as today. Are you going to keep going?
Yep. Like every other activity of the mind, it must satisfy Johnson's prime concern, which is with what comes near to ourselves, what we can put to use. Sir Francis Bacon, who provided some of the ideas that Johnson put to use, famously gave that advice: read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. I add to Bacon and Johnson, a third stage of reading, Emerson, fierce enemy of history and all of his historicisms, who remarked that the best books impress us with the conviction that one nature wrote and the same reads. Let me use Bacon, Johnson, and Emerson into a formula of how to read. Find what comes near to you and can be put to the use of weight and considering, and that addresses you as though you shared the one nature, free of time's tyranny. Pragmatically, that means first find Shakespeare and let him find you. If King Lear is fully to find you, then wait and consider the nature it shares with you, its closeness to yourself.
Okay, great. So I know we spent a lot of time on this, but I think it's important to just kind of get in the thing here. And I think we're going to come back to these next week, because I really want to talk about these before we get to the Bible. But notice what Bloom has done here. He's taken three authors and three little statements about how to read that he likes, right? And then he takes their three statements and kind of synthesizes them, almost like a collage. He brings them together into one overall statement. And you can actually see how he has taken his own reading and weighed and considered it, or passed his own judgment, done his own kind of thinking on it. So he says, take Samuel Johnson's expression, to read what comes near to ourselves and what we can put to use. What does Johnson mean by that? To read what comes near to ourselves and what we can put to use.
Kind of like what he said at the beginning, to read for ourselves, to read something that's meaningful to us.
Yeah, I think we could just use the words, when he says near to us, something that seems relevant to us, right? I mean, Bloom wants us to read things like Shakespeare, but he knows that you can't, if someone's not inspired to read Shakespeare because it doesn't seem relevant to them, it's not going to be a worthwhile experience for them, right? So what's relevant for us, and what's the part about putting it to use?
Like putting it to use in our daily lives, like,
yeah, that when we find something that's relevant to us, it's also going to be practical, right? And this is big, because I think most of us consider reading, like, maybe we think it's entertainment, and in that sense it's practical. It's very clear here, Harold Bloom is not talking about entertainment. He is talking about something that's enjoyable and pleasurable, but he's talking about something more serious than entertainment, right? And we typically don't think of this kind of reading as practical, right? But he's saying that if you find the right book or the right text, it is, right? And you know what's lurking here in what Bloom is saying? Aristotle, in, I think it's the first book of the Metaphysics, he says, because human beings have reason, all human beings desire to know. Because human beings have reason, or the ability to understand things, that's all he really means. We all have the desire to know. Because we can understand things, we want to use our brain to try to understand the world around us. What's another way of saying this? We have curiosity. We have curiosity. And what's Bloom saying here? Those of us who are curious enough to start grappling with the world out there, in the process, we're not only going to learn about the world, we're also going to learn about ourselves. And the two are kind of like two sides of the same coin. Okay, then he takes Francis Bacon, famous founder of like modern natural science and politician. He says, read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. What the heck is Francis Bacon saying? Francis Bacon from the 17th century. So he speaks an English that's not totally familiar to us. What is Francis Bacon? What is Sir Francis Bacon saying?
Could it be that it's like taking what you're reading, you know, understand it, take it in instead of using it against, you know, like to either, I don't know. I don't know how to translate it from my head to words.
So this is a big thing. It's really talking about how to read, how we should approach what we're reading. He says, read not to contradict and confute. What does it mean to contradict?
Disagree, go against someone's word.
Yeah,
Or,
and confute is like another way of saying refute. It's basically a synonym. It's almost the same word, right? So he's saying don't read to prove everybody wrong, right? I know I get in that mode, like in conversations where I'm just determined to like prove whatever the person is saying is wrong, right? The problem is when you start doing that, it's more about you than it is about understanding what's actually being said. You're not really listening anymore. So he says, don't just go in to try to prove the author wrong. But then he says the opposite, don't do the opposite either. He says, don't have blind faith and believe and take for granted what you're reading. So don't assume the simple truth of what you're reading. So you have some balance between the two. He says, or to find talk and discourse, I think he's like stuff to chat about, like water cooler gossip. He says, but rather read, not to simply agree, not to simply disagree, but to weigh and consider. What does he mean by weigh and consider?
I guess he means like having a point of view.
Yes.
Or like to
But
think about the reading.
Yeah, to think about it how?
The writer's perspective.
Think about this. If we're not simply agreeing or determined to just simply agree, if we're not simply determined to disagree, but we're there to weigh and consider, what's the kind of middle ground between agreement and disagreement with what you're reading? How are you able, what allows you to be able to agree or disagree with what someone's written? What do you have to do first?
Like assess what they're saying and see.
Thank you. Thank you. You can't possibly agree and you can't possibly disagree with an author unless you actually understand what the hell they're talking about, right? When we look at Tim Parks, we see a more aggressive attitude. He's a little more irreverent. But one thing Harold Bloom here really stresses is before you start making judgments about other people as manifest in their words, you need to understand what the heck they're saying first. And that is a big challenge in and of itself. Because honestly, when you've got, you know, one thing that happens when you're young and you read a great work, but written someone by who's twice your age, 3 times your age, they've lived a shitload more than you have. They know more than you have simply because they've lived. And some of these authors are genuinely wise. Like they really have soaked in the world around them in this way, not to refute it, not to agree with it, not to disagree with it, but just to understand it, right? So notice this really comes back to what he said at the beginning. It's this weighing and considering is connected with our ability to judge and form opinions, right? And our ability to judge and form opinions has to do with 2 things. It has to do with our understanding of the world, but then our ability to be kind of judicious and careful about the judgments we make, that we're actually making judgments that are based on what we're seeing rather than just kind of the prejudices of the time, right? And that's really hard. This is a great challenge for every person, every reader. It's a great challenge. Okay. So then Emerson, he says the best books impress us with the conviction that one nature wrote and the same reads. What the heck is he talking about? What is that one nature that wrote and the one that reads, the same one that reads? This is kind of a little bit of poetic license here. He's not really spelling it out very exactly clearly what he means by this. What is the one nature that wrote and the same that reads?
Is he like maybe talking about like a work that everyone agrees with, like no one can dislike?
Not necessarily. I think you're on the right track, but not necessarily.
Let's see.
What is that nature that the reader and the writer have in common? That shouldn't be so hard. We always stress how everybody's different and diverse, but we don't spend much time talking about how people are the same.
So I guess, does it mean like the reader and the writer having the same thing in common, like talking about the
Yeah, but what is it? It's a big thing, not a small thing. It's a big general thing. And I guess when I say it, you're going to be like, "Don't." That's kind of obvious, but it's important.
The same idea,
Bigger than that.
value,
Bigger than that. The one nature that wrote and the same reads. What do we share in common with all other human beings? In the same way that the reader and the author share.
The desire to do good and like be happy.
I couldn't hear you there clearly, Fahim.
Yes, the like you said in the past, the desire to do good and like be happy.
That's involved, but that's still too specific. Okay, I'm gonna say it. Because we gotta get done here. And I think we can get through Tim Parks. What is Emerson arguing for? And Bloom wants to highlight this. That human nature, that's the nature we're talking about here. And I'll be a little more specific than just saying human nature in a second. Human nature is what we have in common between the reader and the author. When we sit down and read, we have a base of common, a foundation of common perspective. We're both human beings. If we didn't have that common foundation, we wouldn't be able to understand even what they're writing about. It wouldn't make sense to us. It wouldn't be intelligible to us, right? We have bodies. We have, I'm going to use the word souls, and not necessarily in the religious sense, but like all that psychological stuff, mind and emotion that make us who we are. We share this in common with other human beings. We're born, we live, we die. We all want to be happy. We all have competing sources of motivation that pull us in different directions. While the details of what we need and desire are different, the general categories of those needs and desires are exactly the same from one human being to another. We have a tremendous range of commonality between human beings. Why is this important? Because we live in a modern age that constantly tells us that our modern age has like transcended the past, and that the people of the past were like fundamentally different, almost like fundamentally different beings, that we're not really like them, and we can't possibly understand, we can't bridge the gap of 3,000 years, 2,000 years. We can't possibly understand those people because the human is like historically and socially constructed, and they grew up in a different time and place with different geography, different gods, different goddesses, one god versus many gods, what have you. They had different things that they were educated in as young people, and then we can't possibly understand what it was like to be them, because here we are in the modern age with cell phones and Zoom, and there they are with like pyramids and slaves and things like that, right? Well, the reminder here is that while there certainly is a gap between us and them, that gap is absolutely bridgeable with careful reading. We can, and this raises a really big issue. Our modern world has all types of biases and prejudices, right? We always think of prejudice like, I don't know, people who are racist or something like that. But I'm thinking in much bigger terms. The way we think, the way we conceive of the world, right? Our whole worldview is really a series of prejudices that are a function of our time and place in the 21st century. And when you open up a book from 3,000 years ago, you're not just opening up something that's old, you're opening up a whole world that has a different point of view on what it means to be a human being in the world. And that gives you better perspective on the world that you actually live in by seeing how other people thought about the basic challenges of being human, right? Someone talked about this earlier, how we're all kind of like indoctrinated into a certain point of view, and then we have to kind of unlearn it. Well, we're going to look at Plato's allegory of the cave, and his very definition of education is not like dumping things in your head to like brainwash you and to indoctrinate you, but in fact, his vision of education is actually like unlearning all those things you were indoctrinated in as a kid and a young adult, and getting a broader perspective on the nature of things, right? And one thing books do from other periods of time, different religions, different civilizations, different cultural points of view, is they give you perspective on the way your own world is that you couldn't possibly have until you like stepped out of your own world and saw it from a slightly different perspective. Okay. Let's do Tim Parks for just a couple minutes. And you know what? We're going to pick up some of this next class. I don't mind it kind of like being a little bit behind here, because it's important to just for us to kind of like have this dialogue. We can answer a couple basic questions about this reading before we call it a night. Okay. Tim Parks, Weapons for Readers. Who wants to go with what's the main point here? What's the main point?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Please do, go for it, Thomas. You have permission as a gentleman. You can now speak.
Thank you. I think the main point of this this article / story is just to be more engaged while reading. I know that reading itself might not be everyone's favorite or like the most most exciting thing, but
Okay, let me just like hammer this home. Number one, reading requires an activity, an exertion of your mind that watching a movie, listening to music, watching things flash on your computer screen does not require, right? I think everybody knows that. Everybody's familiar with that, right? Reading is something that's active rather than passive, right? So there's an interesting way in which when you watch TV, you're like really consuming it passively. But when you're reading a book, it forces your brain to work, and it's not a passive activity. You want to keep going, Thomas?
no, it's okay. You can finish what you're
No,
saying.
I'm done.
Oh yeah, okay
Just
then.
and I'm basically highlighting something you're saying there.
Yeah, like in addition to what you were saying, just simply like in the first paragraph, it talks about how simply holding a pen can change our attitude to what we're reading, and when we're actively doing, such as like taking notes and annotating, whether
Okay,
that's
yeah. So let me ask it. He wants us to be active and obviously I think Bloom wants us to be active too. In what ways does Parks want us to be active? How does this manifest itself? You started to talk about it right there.
yeah, he wants us to like annotate and be critique and have your own our own position.
So
And
yeah, let's pause. Remember what Bacon said. You don't read just to contradict and confute or to agree with. But what is some of the things Park is talking about? Writing down notations when you agree and when you disagree. Or he even
right.
has more flamboyant things like, I think this is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
I don't agree. This doesn't ring true to me, kind of thing. Any other kind of reactions he wants us to cultivate?
I mean, I know he mentions that we should be aggressive.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Bloom has a slightly more reverential attitude toward the text. He really wants us to, when he says weigh and consider it, he wants us to really be a little more respectful to what the author's meaning is, and to kind of be patient with the author. Where, I mean, think about it, weapons for readers. There's something aggressive just in the metaphor of the title, where he wants us to kind of attack this text and not be so reverential. You come in with a great work of literature and everyone goes, oh my God, that's so and so, that's a famous writer. We have to be respectful. And Parks is saying, no, you don't have to buy all that bullshit that is in the Bible or whatnot. I mean, you have to set a very high bar for yourself, because there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible and it's well written. But he wants you to feel comfortable having your own opinion here, so you can see the commonalities with Bloom. Question for Thomas, and we got a minute and a half left. What are you really doing? So this is great. There you can see why he has these pictures in this little essay he wrote, because you see what reading really is. Reading is not just reciting the words on the page. Reading, in terms of how to read, is actually annotating it, right? The question is, what are you really doing when you annotate the text in this manner, when you underline, when you make marginal notes, and so on and so forth? What are you really doing?
He wants us to read beyond, things such as I know he mentioned such as alliteration, rhythm, things like that.
Yeah,
and
and he wants us to cultivate our own opinion, right? So this connects back in with Bloom. But specifically, in general terms, when we mark up a book like this or a photocopy, what are we actually doing? So, someone other than Thomas. That's really good, Thomas.
It's almost like having a conversation with the author, or like going back and forth.
You are having a conversation with the author. The only problem is once you write your question to them, they can't answer back to you.
Yeah.
And you have to figure it out for yourself, what they might say. It's quite fascinating. So Annie says, when you're making all these notation, you're formulating your own thoughts and putting them into the text or the story. I absolutely agree. Let's put it even in broader terms. When you're making all these notations, you're thinking and you're demonstrating your thought on the page, so you know that you actually have done it, right? Of course, these are things that could happen without making any of the annotations, but by being forced to make the annotations, it's also forcing you to think. All right, I know we're a little bit over here, but let's finish with this. The title, A Weapon for Readers. What is the weapon?
Annotating, keeping a pen by you when you read.
You're pretty much there, but you're not quite, because it's really, what is the weapon? Because he even makes it, I mean, we haven't read it, but what is the weapon? There's a simple connection here.
Is
You
it
hear-
us?
Pardon?
Is the weapon just like us understanding the text?
We're getting there. More literally, what is the weapon? I mean, the previous person, I can't remember who it was now, you just about said it. What is the weapon that we bring to the text, that we attack the text with?
Our pencil, our hand.
Yeah, yes. So the pen, you know, like the pen is truly mightier than the sword and stuff like that. And he has a little riff in there where he lets you know that the pen, and we're not going to look at it now because we're out of time, but the pen is the weapon. Okay. Look at this text. It's been beat up with that weapon, right? That's really, you know, you ask yourself, what is the meaning of this title? Parks has constructed this essay, if you read carefully, to make it really clear that the weapon is the pen. However, the pen is not the ultimate weapon. What is the ultimate weapon that we bring to a text? Weapon in quotation marks.
Our analysis or ability to analyze.
I think pretty much, because what are all the markings of the pen represent?
Our thoughts.
Yeah.
Our questions and observations.
You know, yes. And the weapon we use to manifest all those things is what? Our what?
Our brain.
Our thoughts and
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. I mean, someone said our understanding and our critical thinking. So absolutely. But I think ultimately lurking here in this metaphor of the title, that the ultimate weapon is our own minds, right? Or even you could say our whole psychology, because we don't bring just like our rational self to a text, we bring our whole self to it. But the weapon that he wants us to use actively is our own mind, and to actually think, right, as we read. And by annotating, it really forces us to be active mentally and respond to what we're reading in a way that even with reading, we could have been much more passive otherwise without annotating. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for holding on there. We need to call it quits here because I don't want to keep you anymore. So any questions about the quiz during the week, just let me know and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, have a great week. Good luck on the quiz, and I will see you next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
You
Have
have
a
a
great
good
night,
night.
everybody. Thank you, Renee.